You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hi. All right. My guest today is globetrotter turned mama, hobby farmer, motherhood blogger, and podcast host, Lina Forrestal. After traveling full-time to busy cities around the world, she and her husband moved back to the States, specifically to New Jersey, and craved a slower paced life. So they bought a 6-acre farm and started their family. Lina is passionate about honest motherhood, homesteading, sustainability, rescue dogs, and connecting with like-minded people. She is the host of the New Mamas podcast, a space created to give first-time moms a voice and to have honest and raw conversations about motherhood. Lina and her guests are normalizing conversations around traditionally taboo topics such as postpartum depression, SIDS anxiety, surviving the newborn phase, body image issues, and more. So today, Lina and I discuss her postpartum experience, everything from pups to anxiety, and I want to offer a trigger warning for intrusive and suicidal thoughts. We discuss how she coped with it all, her experience starting therapy, and what she's learned about her own childhood since becoming a mother herself. We talk about postpartum body image, loaded language around pregnancy, food, and exercise, and how she's learned to love herself. All right, here's Lina. Hey, Lina. Thank you for being here with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's funny to do this little intro considering we just spent an hour talking to each other for your show, but hi.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on your podcast. I don't get the opportunity to be a guest actually very often, so this is truly an honor.
Yeah, well, it's a nice feeling to be able to just have someone ask you some of the things you want to talk about. Then I don't know, sometimes it feels a little, even though we have shows, right? Doesn't it feel a little self-indulgent sometimes?
A little bit.
Be just out there with your stuff.
Yes, and I do have some solo episodes, but those are so hard. It's hard to talk to yourself for 45 minutes.
Totally is. Yeah, no, I get it. So, all right. So, Lina, I've heard your show quite a bit, and I've heard you talk about this feeling before, and I want to ask you to kind of go into it for us. The picture of motherhood that you had prior to being a mom, and how that differs for you now that you are one.
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm trying to bring it back to when I remember we were living in Thailand at the time, and I had a couple of girlfriends that were also expats, and we were all getting drunk around the dinner table. And I just remember we were talking about kids and stuff, and I remember saying, I can't wait to be pregnant. I am going to be such a cute pregnant girl. I can't wait to have kids. And everyone, there were 2 girls, but they were a little bit shocked to hear that because we were just young and having fun. So I knew I always wanted to be a mom when I met my husband. I don't think I really had a great visualization of what motherhood actually looked like. I think it was reduced down to I'll have this cute baby. And I was really naive to the newborn stage. I think I pictured him or the child coming out of my womb being 6 years old and already able to do everything and talk to me. Like, I think I just didn't, my mind didn't comprehend all the stages of infant, like newborn, infant, toddler. So
Yeah.
that's, and the reality of it now is that it feels like motherhood has felt like it's happened to me in stages. I feel like
Mm.
there's been different turning points of where I feel like I've been able to see the light. Like, that's the only way that I can describe it, is when I was
Mm-hmm.
deep in the newborn stage, I felt like at 3 months I started to see the light. And then 6 months was another turning point where he started to sit by himself. I felt like that was another turning point. So it's been an interesting journey. Yeah, for the listeners, I'm mother of one so far, and my son
Mm-hmm.
is 20 months. So he's almost
20.
2.
Ugh, you're coming into a fun age. It's gonna change again. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I don't know about you, but I was excited to be a mom, but so you pictured your kid essentially coming out at 6. I got excited to be a mom, like picturing them at like 21.
Wait, that's hilarious.
Like I was excited to have kids so that I could drink with them and travel with them and like have these
Oh my
just
god.
fun grown-up experiences. Forget the first 20 years of actually raising them.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about the newborn? Like at the newborn phase, I think here's something that I've come to realize is that it's so intense. This is maybe this is any phase, but they're so intense. And then once you're through them, it's like, okay, I'm done. And then you move on and you kind of forget about it. What was hard? Like thinking back, really, what was hard? And what do you wish you knew going into it?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for me was when people would say, enjoy the moment, or
Mm,
enjoy this stage, or they sleep so much, take advantage, because I just felt like I wasn't enjoying the moment. I think for me, a lot of the challenges they weren't physical. I was actually okay, the lack of sleep. Like, I wasn't, I'm good. Like, I feel like I'm a powerhouse. Like, I can, like, muscle through physical pain and physical
okay.
discomfort, but mental
Mhm.
discomfort I'm not great
Mm,
at. And that's where I felt like I wanted each stage to be rushed. Like, I was like, I can't wait until he's not a
yeah.
newborn. I can't wait till he can support his head. I can't wait till he can sit up on his own. The
Hmm.
hardest part for me were those long days when they're newborns. I was nap trapped a lot. Like, so
Oh,
I
yes.
did not sleep train. I did a lot of contact naps, and I leaned into what was comfortable. So
Mm,
what made me uncomfortable was him crying. I could not
mm,
and still cannot deal with it.
yeah.
So if he slept comfortably on the boob, I was breastfeeding. We did both. I breastfed and we did formula. If he napped on the boob, I left it. I left it alone. I
Hmm.
let it happen. So I spent a good 12 weeks just on my couch watching reality TV, which
Hmm.
was comfortable because I also was struggling with crippling postpartum anxiety. So the thought
Hmm.
of leaving my house just felt like there were dangers. Like, the world to me was a very, very dangerous place. It was car accident. What if the car seat? What if someone knocks me over the head and steals him? I was convinced that everyone that looked at him wanted to steal him from me. And it was like almost like an animal. I felt like an animal. Like, I felt like a mom, like a mama wolf, or a mama, like a mama animal. That's what it
Like
felt like.
truly in the wilderness trying to survive with your baby.
Yeah, and if anyone looked at my baby, I felt like the hair, like, talk about physical reactions, like, go back on the back of
Mm,
my neck, and I felt like all of a sudden the fight or flight, right? And for me, it was
mhm.
like fight and then flight with my child. It was the looking back, that was the hardest part. It
Yeah.
wasn't the physical stuff at all. It was the mental aspects of it.
Yeah. I wrote down two notes. One is that I know you did actually experience a pretty severe physical pain though
Yeah.
in as well during this time. And I want you to get into that a minute, but I also wrote down, the crying and not being able to handle it and just not enjoying it. I mean, Is that from a place of heartbreak, my baby's upset, or are you set off by it? Like, are you
Mm.
reacting to it yourself? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, not to get too deep into it, but it comes from maybe it comes from childhood, not feeling like I got enough physical affection. Like
Mm,
maybe it felt like I never felt safe in childhood, and that
mm,
when I cried, I felt like no one consoled me, or people told me to like put on my big girl pants, or
mhm.
I feel like maybe it comes from that. Like maybe hearing my child cry, I feel like I hear myself crying. So
Yeah,
in taking care of him and giving him a hug or holding him for him to feel safe makes me feel like I'm consoling my inner child. I could be totally
yeah,
wrong, but that's, I think if I were to like really dig deep, I feel like
yeah,
that's what's going on.
yeah. I ask because I think what I've learned and through my parenting experience, but also through interviewing so many therapists, is that so much of what we go through in parenting is really about reparenting our younger selves and feeling very triggered and pulled and pushed by what we're going through with our own kid. And it maybe not even totally conscious, but our brain and our wiring remember, even if we don't.
Wow.
And, I think it's really interesting. And I mean, it's annoying sometimes, but it's interesting because, yeah, like I hear crying and I immediately hear in my head, you know, there's no crying in baseball. Like that's what comes to mind for me. And
Yeah.
I can't separate the fact that I was told that in high school, not as a baby. you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? But yeah, I'm very triggered by crying. I can't stand it. I don't know, but I don't. It's sometimes heartbreaking, but it's mostly like just stop, just there's no
Mm-hmm.
crying here. So that's why I ask anyway. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
I think crying is like what in our generation crying was definitely not okay. Like my parents are immigrants, and so I'm
mm,
first generation, and no matter what I was crying about, it was not as bad as what they suffered as children, which I will
right.
give them that. They both came from very like challenging childhoods. Of course, like my dad was
Hmm.
a refugee like 3 times in his young
Wow.
life. So, of
Yeah.
course I don't know what he went through, but when you're like 6 and you're crying, and
Yeah.
it's hard to hear that. Yeah, you think you're sad. Think about what I had to go through to get here.
Hmm.
You will never have to suffer the way I suffered. You like, why are you crying? So, and I think
Yeah.
that's a
Yes.
very common narrative that a lot of immigrant children or first generation children feel. So then from a young age, we're taught crying isn't a good thing, crying isn't okay. And I still even find myself like, even when my son, the big emotions now when they're toddlers, like,
Hmm.
I try to let him. It happened yesterday. He was having a meltdown because he didn't want to come inside. Like he wanted to play outside, but as you know, because you're in New Jersey too, it was frigid,
Freezing
and
yesterday.
his
Yeah.
little fingers were beet red from the cold, and we were like, no, let's go inside. So he was having a meltdown, and my husband and I just looked at each other. We're like, okay, just let it happen. We'll be here when
Yeah.
he's done. And
Yeah.
it's so hard.
It is hard.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, mental versus physical pain. Talk to me about your physical pain experience.
Ooh, girl. Yeah, and like I said, I feel like I have a high tolerance for pain. I was always an athlete. I was always getting hurt. But
Hmm.
what happened to me was, and I wonder if any of your listeners have gone through this, it's called PUPS, PUPPS. The full medical name is pretty long, but basically what happens is in your third trimester, you start to get hives around your belly button, and they become very, very, very itchy.
Mm.
And as you itch them, they spread. They're hives. It's an
Oh.
allergic reaction, and it typically happens to women who are having boys because of the increased testosterone, and women who
Mm.
also have gestational diabetes.
Mm.
So I had both. So I
Oh.
had all these like magical, and it's actually kind of a rare like medical condition. So a
Yeah.
lot
I'd
of
never heard of it until I heard you talk about it.
Yeah, it's rare. And
Yeah.
what typically happens is once the baby is born, it's something that clears up once your
Hmm.
baby is out of your body.
Hmm.
But in rare, very rare cases, it spreads into a full body reaction, which is what
Oh,
happened to me. So my entire body was inflamed. I would actually like look at my hands and you could see, I physically saw hives. Like I saw my whole hand pulsate and I
oh,
saw the hives pop up. It
oh
was
my God.
and the most frustrating part is the doctors didn't know what it was, and so they kept prescribing me steroids. I was on a cyclovir for like a herpes simplex virus because they just didn't know, so they gave
Yeah.
me a bunch of medication while I'm breastfeeding.
Oh
So
my God.
it was challenging, and I'm sure that didn't help my mental state as well, as my body was so broken. I would sit there breastfeeding him while also having like cold compresses all over my
Oh,
entire body. Clothing, everything was so painful. But yeah, it's weird how we forget. I feel like how women
yeah.
forget those first 8 weeks, because even talking about it doesn't, like you said on my podcast, me describing it doesn't do it justice, because it was very, very painful
Yeah.
and in ways I think very traumatic. But I don't even internalize that as trauma.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm like, it was fine.
Yeah.
It was not
Right.
fine.
Right. 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 You talked on your show about Googling prayers for pain,
Yes.
like being so desperate that you just wanted anything to help take this pain away.
Isn't that
I
funny? I
can't imagine
forgot.
having a newborn
Isn't that funny? I
during that.
forgot. Like, I actually, you brought that up. I forgot all about that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm Catholic, but I'm not like so religious that I'm praying all the time for different things. But
Right.
I think there's like a line in a Taylor Swift song that says something like, when I'm going through something, it's like about her mother having cancer, and
Mm.
how she's like, well, I'll believe in Jesus too if this will save you. And that's kind of what it felt like. I was like, I'll
Oh,
believe in anyone, any God that will take this pain away from me.
yeah.
Yeah, it was bad.
How did you manage caring for your baby and that level of pain?
Just pushing through. Like my baby, like Archie, my son's name is Archie. Archie was number one in my mind. And I think also the postpartum anxiety drove me to care for this child, where I don't even know if I experienced if it was love or if it was more of an animalistic need to keep my baby
Mm.
alive. That's really what it
Hmm.
felt like. And I remember like anxiously messaging, like I had a friend, she's a mom of four, and I was asking her, I was like, how did you do this 4 times? I can't, like, I was lying awake at night, like watching him sleep, so scared that he would just stop breathing. I mentioned that SIDS was one of my biggest fears, and I couldn't imagine doing it more than
Yeah.
once. Like it was, I was like, this is so excruciatingly hard. But I think I didn't even recognize the pain because of that animal need of keeping this baby alive. It felt like I was a wounded like animal, like mother
Yeah.
animal that will just not even feel the pain. Like the adrenaline
Yeah.
just drove me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you're describing is so intense. How how did you start to identify, like right now we can talk about it as postpartum anxiety, and we have terminology for it. Did you have terminology for it right away, or when and how did that come?
Yeah. That I think was the hardest part. I didn't know. I sometimes I actually describe it, and I actually was talking to my therapist yesterday about this, but it felt like I was living in another reality.
Hmm.
It really felt like I couldn't say like today I can have an intrusive thought of like someone coming and kidnapping my kid, and I can label it. I can say intrusive thought, not gonna happen. Like
Hmm.
that's an intrusive thought. Like let's scale it down. But back
Hmm.
then, that was a very real. Like I, my anxiety was so bad, and that's an interesting thing about mental health is that everyone's depression or anxiety looks so different to
Yeah.
every single human being because we're just chemically made different, and what we've gone through in life and everything that's shaped us have been so different. So, but in my case, my anxiety was so bad. I lived in an alternate universe, but I knew something was wrong. I thought it was, I didn't even know about postpartum anxiety. I only knew about postpartum depression. So I remember Googling over and over postpartum depression, and reading through the bullet points meticulously, saying, I don't feel any of this, but there's something wrong. What is it?
Mm-hmm.
I feel a connection to my child. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt myself. Everything checks out. So why am I feeling this way? This isn't normal. And I forget where I finally, it was probably like WebMD, see also like postpartum. And I was like, okay, let's just keep clicking down the
Yeah.
rabbit hole until I got to postpartum anxiety. And maybe this was, this is probably like week 8 or 9. This was not in the beginning. I finally stumbled upon the symptoms of postpartum anxiety. And I remember I was like, check, like intense fear of this, check excessive worrying, check, like all the symptoms just totally checked out. So that's when I knew I needed help, but I didn't get it.
So what did you do?
I just powered through. And maybe bringing it back to childhood and sort of the messaging that I was fed is that you just power through. You are strong, and you don't ask for help, right? In a lot of immigrant cultures, like asking for help, admitting that there's something wrong with you, mental health, it's almost like admitting defeat or weakness. And even though I didn't feel that way, I think it was so ingrained deep in my like blueprint of how I operated that I just, even knowing I needed help, I didn't get it. So I just powered through until time went on, and maybe I was a little less anxious or a little like less it was wild thinking back to that.
Yeah. I think what was coming to mind for me as you're talking is, so much of now being a parent, that I come across in whether it's parenting experts or therapists or this or that, and is constantly talking about how you can talk to your kids, you can tell them things, but really the way they learn is by modeling what you do.
Oof.
And hearing you say, maybe going back to your childhood about what was ingrained, it could also just very much be that you never saw anyone seek help.
Yeah, that
You
is for
didn't
sure.
have a model. You didn't have someone to go, oh, I don't know what was going on for that parent, but they got help. Or that aunt, or it doesn't necessarily even need to just be a parent, right? It can be any significant adult figure in your life. And I think that is something that's so great about your experience now, is that your kid will have the experience of seeing his mom get help.
Oh gosh, I didn't even think of that. But that is so true. I think the second he can understand, like, mommy goes to therapy, I think I will shout it from the rooftops. I feel like there's
Yeah.
no, like, I have heard, so I feel like the times are changing. Like, my husband's a teacher, and he said he has overheard students just sort of openly talk about, oh yeah, I have baseball, and then I have therapy, and then like it's so if
What age?
mid,
What age is he talking about?
middle
Middle
school.
school? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
that really does fill my heart with so much hope and love, because I feel like there's uh, like being just better humans to ourselves and to
Yes.
each other. I think starts with some of that self-awareness that we can share. Like, I feel
Totally.
like nothing good comes from holding it all inside.
Totally. Out of curiosity, where are your parents from?
My mom is Brazilian and my dad is Chinese and Portuguese.
Wow.
So I talked about
Okay.
him being a refugee. He was born in China, and he was a refugee from like the communist regime back
Wow.
in the 60s. So then
Yeah.
they moved to Africa, where it was a Portuguese colony in Mozambique, and then they were refugees when the Civil War broke out, and they moved to Brazil, where he met my mom. So
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So what prompted you? How did you get to the point of seeking help and getting therapy?
Yeah, it was like maybe 8 months into podcasting. So
Mm.
similar, like I think podcasting was very much became a way that it was not therapy, but it was a way that I sought some connection with other
Mhm.
moms. And that was therapeutic to me to hear about other people's experiences. But I
Mhm.
finally think I just got the courage to take those tiny steps. Remember how you were just saying on my podcast, like sometimes like just doing laundry feels like a huge level of effort. For me,
Yes.
the idea of like going on my health insurance website, typing in someone in my area, all the
Yes.
steps of like
Yes.
reading the
Yes.
descriptions, getting all
Yes.
these hopes and dreams. And I
Mhm.
analyzed in a few different episodes, I forget when, is like I don't know if I don't know, but I think one of my biggest fears was finding someone. I think rejection is one of my
Mm.
I think rejection is something I struggle with. And therapy and finding a therapist is a relationship. And I think I
Mhm.
was so fearful of them not being a good fit, or maybe they didn't want to work with me. I was so scared of that rejection that it kept me
Mm.
from actually starting. And I think that's what keeps a lot of
Wow.
people from doing the work of Google. I think a lot of people don't seek therapy because of those it feels very complicated to find a
Yes.
therapist.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, let's start with I didn't even know that I could potentially find a therapist through my insurance. I know a lot of people that unfortunately in this country, that's not an option.
Yeah.
But in my case, I'm thankful that it is, but I didn't even realize I could look into it. I just
Yeah.
assumed off the bat that you had to pay fully out of pocket no matter what. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I totally get it. And then once someone said it to me, I was like, oh, I can log on to my insurance. Like yeah. And when you're in a state of needing help, it's like this vicious cycle of the things that you have to do are the
Oh,
hardest things to do.
yeah. It's almost like there was no way I would have been able to get help when I needed it. But then
Yeah.
I feel like I had just dealt with it for so long that I finally got to a point where I did have some breathing room, where
Mm-hmm.
I finally, oh, well, I guess maybe I glossed over I had a turning point that really symbolized to me that I needed help.
Mm.
Um, so I don't know. I had a couple of really bad months. And it's funny how we forget. Like
Yeah.
it's funny how we kind of take some of these feelings and suppress them so much that they almost like get deleted from our mind. But I had
Mm-hmm.
some really bad months and I was journaling a lot. And I remember I wrote in my journal that the only thing that was keeping me alive, sorry, you might need like a content warning before this, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wrote that the only thing that's keeping me alive is my son. Because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't want to be here anymore. And
Mm.
I just felt, I guess maybe I was depressed. And I didn't even, I mean, it's
Yeah.
weird. Like having the words come out of my
Yeah.
mouth, like it's honestly
Yes.
jarring. And I don't know what was going on that day, but I wrote it in my journal and I think I was rushing to get out the door, get him to daycare, and I put the journal into his daycare bag
Mm.
and off went my journal and it was flipped
Oh
open to the
God.
page where I wrote
Oh
I want to
God.
kill I the
Oh
only
my
thing keeping me
God.
alive is my son. Otherwise I wouldn't want to be here. I'm so like whatever. And when I realized, I got home and when I realized that I left the journal in the daycare bag, I like panicked. And I
Yeah.
remember calling my sister and I was like, I have to tell you something. And I was like sobbing. I was like, I don't want you to worry, but I wrote this in my journal and it went to daycare. And what if they find it? They're going to take him away from me. Again,
Oh.
one of my biggest fears is my son getting taken, like whatever, something happening and I'm not with him.
Yeah.
I was like, they're gonna call CPS. he's going to get taken away from me. I'm so scared. Like, I was like shaking, so scared. And I don't know to this day. So the end of the day came back, journal was in there. I don't know if anyone read it. If they read it, no one reached. I'm assuming that if someone had read it, maybe they would have reached out to see if everything was okay. But that,
You never know.
yeah, oh, I don't know. But I remember feeling embarrassed, guilty. I felt shame. I felt scared, and it almost felt like a divine intervention. Like, I know that sounds really strange, but it felt, because it was so it was so uncharacteristic for me to put the journal in the daycare bag, like, of all things.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah,
On all days of all days, right?
yeah, yes, in all my journal entries,
Right.
that one somehow made it in there, and I think it just like kind of clicked. I was like, and I think the act of calling my sister and vocalizing
Having
to
to
her,
say it.
like having to say what I wrote and what I was so scared of, and I think that was a turning point where I was like, okay, I think I need to buckle down and really help myself. So that's, yeah, now it's coming back to me. I was like, why did I, what led to me? Was I just feeling better and I was able to get help? I was like, oh wait, no, that happened.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I found the therapist, and if it was the first shot, like, she's wonderful, and honestly my life like improved from there, which is I don't want it almost feels unreal to say, like, I started therapy and then everything started to get better. It sounds very simple, but I really put in the hard work too, of like when she gave me homework or when she gave me articles to read or books to read, I did it. Like, I treated it very much like it was a class and I was going to get a 4.0 because I just really wanted to get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you also touched on another big reason why particularly women and mothers hesitate to get help is that fear of, will someone think I'm incompetent, or will someone take my baby away from me? And I think especially before you're working with a mental health physician or counselor, you're dealing with a medical doctor who's not trained, you're dealing with your gynecologist, you're dealing with a pediatrician, where I think there is a little bit of reason to fear that. I mean, we're not, at least in my experience and a lot of the experience of women I talk to, we're not made to feel like this is a super safe place to talk about our emotions. Like you've talked about, I've talked about, we're handed a sheet of paper that says answer from 1 to 10 how much you're feeling this or that or the other. It's not let me give you a hug and ask you how you're doing.
It's very much, you're given this sheet of paper, they turn around, they're doing stuff on the computer, you fill it out, and they're like, oh, and then they take it, they look at it, and then it's done. It's not like no one looks you in the eye and says, I just want to ask, how is everything going? Like, it doesn't, you feel like a number. At least that's, I loved my practice where I went. It was great. I was treated very well. But there are also still strangers. Like, I don't know if you had the same experience. You see different nurses, and I saw different, it was a practice. I saw different doctors, and it's hard to tell someone, a stranger, I like, it's hard to vocalize, like, and especially if you are having thoughts of like self-harm. Are you going to tell a stranger, like, I think about harming myself if anything were to happen to my son or whatever? Like, you're not going to say that to a stranger.
Yeah. And I think it's, as hard as it is to say to a stranger, I found it as difficult, if not more difficult, to even acknowledge it for myself. So to acknowledge it for myself and then to acknowledge it to someone else, and all while you're in it, it's unfathomable almost. And to the defense, I guess, of these practices, it's not really what they're there for. Right? Like, they're there and they're trained to treat your medical body. And you mentioned it in our conversation for your show and I completely agree. There should be a mental health professional in that environment at some point. Like,
Yeah.
even if they don't live there fully and make a full-time job out of it, but like at least once or twice throughout the pregnancy, let's make that a part of the process. And then at 6 weeks, yes, we go see our OB, and you also make an appointment with a counselor.
Can you
And
imagine even just a half hour or
yeah,
just a half hour appointment with a mental health professional that is just starting in pregnancy? Can you
yeah,
imagine like that? I truly feel like it would change everything. It would be so great if in the future, maybe when our kids get
yeah,
pregnant,
yeah.
it looks like physical therapy and medical and
Oh, yes.
OBGYN and mental health. It all lives in the same team.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
Yes. The physical therapy too. I mean, and this is something that I wanted to talk to you about as well, because, and this isn't necessarily physical therapy, but it's reminding me of it is, you know, the whole idea of our bodies and our physical beings before, during, after pregnancy. I mean, that weighs heavily on my mental health. And something that I've talked about is, you know, by my medical doctors and my medical team, which I get, but being constantly praised throughout my first pregnancy for my like almost lack of weight gain, like being like very on target, quote unquote, like
yikes.
2 pounds, 2 pounds, 2 pounds, 2 pounds, and being like, okay, you're doing great, you're doing great, you're doing great. And then with my second pregnancy, actually gaining more, and there being a little bit of like hmm, we've gained a little more weight this time, and
Wait,
we just want to
did they
watch,
really
and we
say
just,
that?
I mean, it was, yeah, like it was a very matter of fact, like, hey, we just want to start to watch the weight gain, we're getting to a point, da da da. And you know I don't know, it really, I mean, that, I'm not, I struggle a lot right now with my postpartum body, and I'm certainly not putting all of that on these doctors, right? Like, I was brought up in diet culture. I understand that this is messaging we get from everywhere.
Girl,
I
yes.
just, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I don't know. I just, it's like we're relying on the gynecologist to like treat the mother, but we're not treating the whole mother. We're
Mm-hmm.
just, I don't know. We're not
Yeah.
treating the whole person.
Whole person care. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to body stuff. But so similar, I had gestational diabetes. And when you have gestational diabetes, you're at risk for type 2 diabetes.
Mm.
You cannot gain weight. If you gain
Mm.
too much weight, you will develop type 2 diabetes. So when we go to the doctor, oh yeah, I think the last time I went to my gynecologist, I think it was to get birth control, but they did the whole physical. And I remember she was so, I'm a vegetarian too. So just the conversation was very much like, well, it's really hard to maintain weight when you're a vegetarian because you don't get enough protein. I was like, okay. I was like,
Oh
but it was
God.
this very like, I was like, so am I at risk for type 2 diabetes? And I remember her saying, losing weight helps with the risk. And I was like, okay,
Mm.
but like, how am I doing? What do you think my weight is, right? How do you think? She goes, it's okay, but losing
Yeah.
weight will help. It was very,
Oh,
but like you said, it was very
yeah.
medical, matter of fact. And I'm like, I'm 5 feet and like 140. I mean, I don't know if saying weight is like triggering or not, but I'm 5 feet and 140, which isn't like great, but it's not,
Fine. It's
it's
your
also not,
body.
but
It's
like,
your
but
body. Right.
what is like a normal
I know
body?
what you're getting at. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I know what you're getting at. Yeah, it's like when they tell you that your BMI qualifies you as being obese, and you're like, first of all, what?
Yeah,
you know?
I would say I was like, and I'm like, well, I think I actually look fine, and like I'm like
Yeah,
mid-size, but I feel like this body I'm in right now is kind of like my normal body without working out 3 hours a day and restricting
yeah,
calories. Like,
yeah, yeah.
But
It's
yeah,
it's loaded. It's loaded dialogue because
loaded
uh,
dialogue. I love that.
I know that you have shared on your show how you were young and struggled with an eating disorder. And here you are now pregnant, talking to a doctor telling you that it's probably better if you lose weight. It's like, mm, does that person, the loaded dialogue, does that person know what they're saying to someone who's struggled with this before and how that might affect them or not affect them or whatnot? I mean, it's a huge risk in just saying something like that,
Yeah.
especially if you're not familiar with a person's background.
Yeah, right. Like yeah, it's a that is very um loaded. And I'm trying to actually one of the things we did, when I started therapy, I think one of the first things we tackled were like body image issues, cuz I think at the time I was struggling with that. I was still breastfeeding, or no, I'd stopped breastfeeding, but you know how it is. Like if I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you breastfed, but your
A little
hormones,
bit.
your hormones are just everywhere, and it makes the weight stick to you like glue. Not that that should be like the focus at all. When
Mm-hmm.
yeah, body stuff is tough. Yeah, and when you have an eating disorder past, sometimes a doctor saying you should lose weight is just the right amount of fuel that little eating disorder needs to take
Mm-hmm.
in and like reactivate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a
Where
yeah.
are you at with it now? Where are you at with your body image and your feelings on your postpartum body and losing weight and all of that?
Yeah, it took a lot of work, but I'm actually comfortable in my body right now. It's been a long journey. I read a really great book. I'll have to send it to you. It's
Please
it's
do, because I need help.
it's all about body image, and it's like it's called something radical self-love. It's very interesting. I you like if I had a physical copy, I would mail it to you, but I buy stuff on my Kindle. But it's just like really learning for me. It was like learning to exist in a larger body because I'd always been smaller, partially
Mm-hmm.
because of I had like orthorexia and I was obsessed with calories and I worked out. I was an athlete. So
Mm-hmm.
everything, all of those actions and having a lot of time led to me existing in a smaller body. So of
Mm-hmm.
course when I got pregnant and now my life is different, I just don't exist in a smaller body, and but that's okay. Like learning to say like that's okay and that I'm a worthy human being, like whether I'm this weight or this weight. Now I just don't weigh myself really anymore.
Yeah.
So, um it's taken a lot of work, but I'm comfortable. But I've been focusing on moving intuitively, like
Mm-hmm.
focusing on movement and eating nutritiously, not losing weight. Like just like
Yeah.
kind of Xing that language out of my house, out of my brain. I don't use the word FAT. I really don't use that word. Any like
Yeah.
I feel I cuz it's so easy. Do I look
Yeah.
FAT? Do I feel like I feel
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah.
And then clothing, I feel like this is something a lot of postpartum moms don't think about, is just buy the larger size clothing. Like stop trying to squeeze into things that don't fit anymore because
Yeah.
your life is just different,
Yeah.
and accept just being accepting of that. But it's taken a lot of work. And of course I still have days where I look at myself and there's parts of myself that I don't love.
Yeah.
But it's just trying to it's trying to tap into that like also sexy side of you too, is like,
Mm-hmm.
like do a little movement in front of the mirror, like booty pop. Like it's kind of sounds silly, but like when you like if you something I like to do is like listen to like Cardi B or like Nicki Minaj and just like kind of move in front of the mirror in like sexy ways that I like is not characteristically me, but makes me feel a
Yeah.
certain way. Uh, so that's helped a lot. It's just like it's
Yeah.
like silly little things. I'm sorry to hear that you're I mean everybody is
Yeah. You know, yeah, I don't know. And it's hard given what I've learned through the show and through some of my own work and reading to talk about it, because even the language, like you said, not using FAT, like even the language that I'm so accustomed to using
Mm-hmm.
feels wrong to me, but I don't necessarily have the language that feels comfortable. So it's,
Mm.
it's hard to even articulate. And I, you know, like I'm the same weight as the day I walked out of the hospital 2 years ago. And that is a very uncomfortable place for me to be. And I've done work around food in that I've really worked to not like berate myself
Mm-hmm.
for eating certain things and eating at certain times or amounts of things or types of foods or whatever. And that feels really good. The big but is that I still am struggling to marry the desire to lose weight with also wanting to just have healthy relationships with food and exercise and body. I don't have the words for it yet because I don't I don't have it figured out. Like I don't know.
It's a slow process, like learning all
Yeah.
that. And what I have found, and I don't weigh myself anymore. I get so tempted sometimes, but I know that that's the eating disorder part of me to like want to measure
Mm-hmm.
myself in like a number. But I found that I have felt like I maybe lost a little bit of weight when I did have a healthier relationship with myself and with food. Like I felt, this is going to sound so cheesy, but once I felt like I was able to love myself at the size I was at,
Mm-hmm.
that's when it actually things started to fall into place, when I started to incorporate like healthy movement. And like I still eat all the things. I just don't eat as much of it because I love food. It's so hard when you
Yeah.
love to eat and you love to cook and you love food too.
Mm-hmm.
Also, yeah, I'm just not into like counting. I used to be into like counting macros and stuff like that,
Yeah.
but
No, I can't bring myself to diet. I can't mentally bring myself to do it. I have no desire to do it. And I feel like right now I'm sort of in this like almost like a testing phase. It's like, okay, I've gotten to the point where I can eat certain things without berating myself. And now I'm like, well, can I eat this without berating myself? Let me see. It's like, so
yeah.
all of a sudden I'm like eating a lot of these foods that were previously forbidden, and learning, like you said, learning that when I started to understand that no food was off limits, and the more I get into that, the less I like feel like the need for certain foods, like in just taking off the restriction of them and making them more accessible makes me desire them less. And so I'm
Yeah.
kind of like testing that out still,
Yeah.
but it's tricky. It's tricky because
It's
I'm like,
it's hard.
I'm combating all of my old thoughts and old, you know, I don't
Food
know,
rules. I
whatever.
mean, food rules
Yes,
is like
yes, yes,
it's a
exactly.
big symbol or sign of disordered eating, is having these
Yeah,
rules around food. And it's really hard to unlearn that, especially like growing up in diet culture and maybe you've had these food rules for a decade or
yeah,
longer. Like
more.
it's really
Yeah,
hard to
yeah,
unlearn all of that. So I'm with you.
yeah.
Um something I that helped me was focusing less on the food and more on the movement, because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like when I move more, I desire, I don't know, because why do we eat certain foods? Like I feel like sometimes food for me is emotional. Like, am I
Mm-hmm.
seeking something for my anxiety, or am I just craving something because I need like a transition between one task to the next? So I
Mm-hmm.
know that what worked for me is I try to do these workout snacks. Like
Okay.
I don't look at working out as like workout. Like I would think
Yeah.
of working out as like, I'm gonna do like 10 minutes of just like, I have a Peloton and there's so many great apps out there with little workout classes, or there's like dance classes on YouTube. But I do workout snacks, so I'll do like 10 minutes here. or I'll do 10 minutes there or 15 minutes here. And that sort of snacking has helped me eat more nutritiously instead of just like, I love eating, like, or like, this is gonna sound terrible too, but like I used to eat like the whole, like instead of having like a giant thing of quesadilla, I would eat it, but I would eat what's an appropriate portion for me and not for my husband, who's twice the size of me.
Yeah.
So, but
I like that though. I like the workout snacks because
snacks are great.
Especially, I mean, you know, like you've got your kid, you've got your house to run, you've got your work. Like sometimes the idea of that intense workout, it's like I don't have the fuel for it.
No.
I don't have it, you know?
No.
Yeah.
Or thinking about pairing movement with like a show you really love. Like I love the Bachelor franchise. Like I like to pair, I put a TV in front of my Peloton and I'll just like ride casually, like nothing insane. But there's so many studies out there that women, especially like women in their 30s, I'm assuming you're in your 30s like me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Women in their 30s, low impact cardio is actually the best for our bodies. So like that, just trying to, I try to reframe it. But the relationship with food, that's a tricky one. It takes work. I know. I think
it takes a long time.
The other thing I think it's tough for moms, I know we're almost at time, is there's almost all this pressure to kind of like, people look at like, I hate like New Year's resolutions. I hate that goals feel so short-sighted, and I think that's our drive for like short-term gratification, but it's not like, if you want to, let's say your goal, just putting it numerically, let's say you want to lose 20 pounds. That's what would make you feel comfortable in your body. I feel like the pressure to lose that in like 6 months or a year, it's too short. In my opinion, not a professional. I think it's too short. I think postpartum moms, like all the hormones don't leave our body like until a year like after we've given birth. So once things regulate, like why can't we make the time frame like 3 years? That sounds nice and digestible and achievable with all these small little steps we take. Like even if for a month your goal is to move 10 minutes a day, like that's doable. It's only 10 minutes and it's a month. Like, but all these consistent small steps, I think that's where we'll see change. But when you want to lose 20 pounds in 6 months, like that becomes overwhelming, and then we just don't do it all together.
Yeah. Or for me, I know it's like to use your example, it's not even 6 months. It's like lose 20 pounds as fast as possible.
No.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, like it's
and then we just won't do it at all. And then we'll get more frustrated.
It's too overwhelming.
Yeah. You get more frustrated and more sad and more like stressed, and you don't love yourself even more because it's not just a physical. It's, why don't I have the willpower to do this? Yes. Like some other women seem like, I remember like, admittedly, like on Instagram, I saw women that gave birth at the same time I gave birth, and they seemed to just sort of lose the weight like right away. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? But it's not about
and you get jealous. I got jealous of people like that. Like it was not right.
Oh yeah. I saw I was like, oh, that girl's arm is so thin, and why doesn't my arm look like that? And it's just, but we're all different. The same way that mental health looks different on everybody, the same way it's like physical. Like our bodies are all so different, like physiologically and genetically. Of course, we're not going to lose weight the same ways.
Right. I know. All right. So with just a few minutes left, I want you to talk about your podcast. What got you into it, and what do you hope to accomplish with your platform?
Yeah, thank you, Chrissy. We'll have to definitely talk again, because I feel like
we scratched the surface
and we have so much in common. We just scratched the surface. But the New Mamas podcast is a podcast started because I was desperate, sobbing in my bathtub, looking for anyone that was going through the same situations that I was going through. I remember typing in like motherhood stories or motherhood anything into the podcast app and not finding anything. And I just had this epiphany. I was like, well, I have so much on my plate, but you know what? Let's just start a podcast. And I started planning it in very small steps. And what came of it was this podcast centered around topics in motherhood that people are often uncomfortable talking about, which I like to call the taboo topics, which are, people are starting to talk more and more about infertility, miscarriages, mental health being a big one, loss. We try to cover everything. I like to say that there's no topic that's off limits on my podcast. The juicier, the better, because we don't like to talk about the juicy things. So that's what I hope to accomplish, is just to inspire women to feel like they're not alone in what they're feeling, because motherhood can be a lonely journey, but knowing that you have other people that are going through the same things. And you can find it on wherever you get your podcasts, the New Mamas Podcast, and then also on Instagram at New Mamas Podcast. And then my Instagram handle is Lina Forrestal.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. And what struck me about your show immediately is even just the title, New Mamas. I think that that's something I'm passionate about as well, as getting to moms as early as possible. I think you and we've both shared how long it took us to actually get help and how far along we were in our motherhood journeys before we got help. And so something I'm always trying to think about is, how do we reach women during pregnancy? How do we reach women who are a year before pregnancy, but who are thinking about it? And so that as a group, we can help prepare women for what's to come, and so that they already have these tools and resources at their fingertips to say, oh, you know what? I heard Lina's podcast episode 6 months ago about postpartum anxiety, and that sounds exactly what I'm feeling right now. And she's 6 days into motherhood. So she goes and gets help. I think it's great. It's so important. So Lina, thank you so much for your time. This was great. I just love talking to you.
Yeah, I love talking to you too. And we'll have to do this again soon.
Oh, I just love her. Lina says that her hope for her podcast is that it feels like you're getting a virtual hug, and it truly felt like a virtual hug, getting to spend time with her. Her energy, her spirit and vibe are so warm, so welcoming, and I loved getting to know her. I also want to thank you, Lina, for your vulnerability and honesty in sharing the details of such a painful time in your life. I know it's not easy, but you are helping so many new mamas feel seen and heard. This episode speaks to the power of storytelling. I talk about this a lot when I give interviews. Storytelling, particularly in motherhood, I believe is vital. Hearing other women talk about their experiences is what helped me identify what I was experiencing when I was depressed and anxious postpartum. It's obvious, but when we become moms, all of our experiences are happening to us for the first time, and we're not exactly sure what's quote unquote normal, what's not. And so I think there's a tendency to live in our heads until we hear someone say something that resonates with us and we go, oh, that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe I should talk to someone. Maybe I should get some help. Or at the very least, hear it and go, oh, okay, I'm not alone. So Lina, thank you for doing what you're doing with your podcast, your blog, and your social media accounts. You're making a difference. And thank you for being here and for listening. I will catch you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.